Site navigation is a critical component of any website, so it makes sense that you should put a lot of thought into planning and styling the links for your sites. So in this movie, I want to explore a few of the concepts that you should keep in mind as you're styling the links on your site. And what I'm looking at is the links.html file, which can be found in the 02_01 directory. And I've just opened it up in a browser. We're going to go through some of the points here and take a look at a couple of examples that I have built into this page. So the first thing that you want to think about as you're planning your links is the first point I make here: make them obvious. And as I mentioned, it does kind of go without saying, links should be obvious. But as people begin to learn how to control different properties of links, they tend to start going away from the default aesthetic. Now, the default aesthetic for links in most browsers is this: underlined blue text. We're all conditioned for that. When we see underlined blue text, we know instantly that's a link. Well, that's one of the first things designers want to change. So they're like, well, this underlined blue text doesn't really fit into the style that I have designed for my site, so I need to change it. And that's understandable. But what happens is a lot of times when they change it, they don't make it obvious enough. Take a look at the paragraph below this, where I'm looking right down here. So which part of this text is the link? When I hover over the word link, it's obvious that that's a link because the pointer shows up. But it looks exactly the same as text that's emphasized. I've seen a lot of people do just that. They'll take their link text and they'll bold the font weight, but they really won't do anything else with it. And once you do that, it becomes really confusing as to what a link in your text is and what it isn't. You want to make it very obvious, like the example right here at the back of this paragraph. You really want it to stand out and contrast from the text around it, and you want that styling to be unique. You don't want any other elements in the site to share that same styling. You want to reserve it just for the links themselves. The other thing that you want to do is really think through how you're using underlines in your site. It's very tempting to remove the underline from your links. It's certainly something that I do from time to time with my sites, but you want to be very careful about doing that. Again, check out this paragraph right here. I've got two examples. Which one of these is a link? The first, this one, or the second, this one? Visually, we're going to take a look at the second one and just automatically assume it's a link. But in this case, it's not. The first one is. So I've removed the underline from the first one, and then I've added underlined text below that. So if you're going to remove an underline, you need to have some other visual formatting that lets the user know, hey, this is a link. That could be a highly contrasting color, changing the font weight, adding a background to it, something that's going to make it stand out within your design so that people know, hey, this is something that it's drawing attention to, and then this is a link. Rollovers really help with that as well, and we'll talk about those a little bit later on in the title. The other flip side of that, of course, is you want to stay away from styling text that isn't a link in a way that makes a user think that it is. Notice that I have a line right down here that says, how frustrating am I? I look like a link, but I'm not. I have seen people do this before. When they're emphasizing text, they'll underline it, or they'll underline certain phrases or titles of things. And when they do that, the user is going to automatically think, hey, this is a link and I can click on it. And it's very frustrating for the user. They just assume that something is wrong with your site and they assume something is broke. So you want to be very careful about that. The next thing that I want to talk about is taking away the focus. Now, there are a lot of different pseudo-class selectors in CSS that allow us to change how we format links based on user interaction. And one of those is focus. One of the things that people typically do is they take away the focus styling of a link because aesthetically they just don't like it. So what is focus styling? Well, let me show you. If I go down to this link right here that says colorblind web page filter, when I click and hold the mouse down on it, you can see sort of that dotted outline that goes all the way around that. Well, if I let go of this and then hit the back button to return to that page, essentially I've established focus on that link. And the default focus styling for browsers is that dotted box line that you kind of see around it. Well, a lot of designers don't like that. They don't like the way it shows up. They don't like the way it sort of sometimes reveals larger link areas than they're comfortable having just because of the styling they've done. So they'll find the focus pseudo-class selector and they'll just remove that. They'll remove the outline from this. But that's a very bad idea. And it's a bad idea because it really dramatically impacts the accessibility of the page. Let me show you what I'm talking about. There are a lot of users out there that can't use a mouse, and they'll use some type of user agent or assistive device that allows them to browse the page without using a mouse. And the keyboard is used a lot of times to tab through the links on the page and then select them. You'll notice, for example, if I click in the upper left-hand corner of this page and then hit the tab key in my browser, every time I hit the tab key, it's going to jump to the next link. So it's very easy, because of the default focus styling of the page, for me to tell when I'm going from one link to another. But if I go into the code of the page, let's say that I write a selector that's going to take away that particular highlighting. So let's say I use the focus pseudo selector and I go into the outline property and I just set that to 0, which is essentially just going to turn that off. Now, if I save this page, go back into my browser and refresh that, now if I click in the upper left-hand corner of the page and I start tabbing through, even though I'm focusing on these different links, you can't tell. And anybody that's using that type of user agent is suddenly going to have a very negative experience with your site because they can't tell where they're looking at. If you want to change the styling to something that's a little bit nicer or something that fits the site a little bit better, there's nothing wrong with that. I could come in, for example, and just say 4-pixel solid red. So styling an outline is almost the same as styling a border, for example. Now, if I save that and preview my page again, as I tab through my links, notice that I'm getting considerably more dramatic styling based on the properties that we changed there in the focus selector. So you're free to alter those or change them in some way that fits the design styling of your site, but don't remove them entirely. I've seen a lot of people do that, and there's a lot of CSS resets out there that will remove that focus styling. You've got to remember to put it back in so that any people browsing your site using some of those assistive devices is going to be able to tab through the links on your page. So it's really, really important. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about is the contrast of the links on your page. A lot of people lose sight of the fact that a large percentage of the population is colorblind or has some form of colorblindness. So choosing colors for your site is more important than you think. It's more than just conveying emotion. A lot of times it's making sure that people can read your site properly. So you want to make sure that all of the colors in your site have a proper amount of contrast, but that's doubly important for links. So I've added a couple of resources here that you can take a look at. The colorblind web page filter, VizCheck, and the color vision testing. These are great resources for learning a little bit more about color blindness. Like the colorblind web page filter, for example, this site will allow you to type in a URL, and let's say I'll just go ahead and do lynda.com, and then fetch the site, and it'll present the site to you as if it were being viewed by a certain type of color blindness, and you can choose from this filter right here which colorblind test you want to run on it. And it's going to give you a nice little snapshot of your site with a filter applied to it that's going to simulate that color blindness effect. It's not going to be entirely accurate, and there are other filters that you can run on this for different types of color blindness. It's a nice way of checking your progress and making sure that the colors that you're using on your site and the contrast that you're using are acceptable within certain ranges of color blindness. So that's definitely a resource you want to bookmark and check as you're developing your sites. And the last thing I want to leave you with is just to keep it simple. You know, I know you hear that all the time, the KISS, keep it simple, stupid. That's absolutely accurate. You know, as you're working with your links, the simpler you can make your link styles, the better, as long as you've got enough contrast and enough stylistic formatting, or at least unique stylistic formatting, to let the user know that this is a link. Now, I've listed some properties here at the bottom of the page that are typical of link styling: background, border, color, font weight, font style, and text decoration. Now, you can certainly modify more styles than that when you're creating your links, but that's really sort of the bread and butter of most link styling. So if you stick with those properties and you really work with them to make sure that you've got the proper contrast and that you've got unique styling defined that really identifies the links on the page, then you're definitely going in the right direction. I know it seems like I went over a lot of information there, but often it's the simplest things in your sites that require the most planning. Good user experience requires links that are simple to identify, that remain consistent throughout the site, and aren't going to confuse your users as to their purpose. Just keep those concepts in mind as you begin styling links in your own sites.